Hi, I'm a Japanese comedian. I'm a representative of Japanese comedian. And some people might be interested in how Japanese comedy is made and appreciated. Well, let me tell you some really basic principles in this video so that you can appreciate the Japanese comedy broadcast on terrestrial TV in Japan, which may be really exotic seen from you guys who enjoy the regular genre of British or US comedy. First of all, Japanese comedians never mention politics. Politics is totally out of bounds. You are not supposed to make political satire on Japanese TV. Why? Well, the TV executives are so afraid of the politicians that they would receive complaint from these politicians when they make fun of them. Well, yeah, I know. You think that comedy is about making fun of politicians, right? Not so in Japan. In Japan, politicians are taboo when it comes to comedy. So you have to behave like a 5-year-old child when it comes to Japanese comedy on Japanese television. You are not supposed to know anything serious about politics. So politics is out of bounds. That is number one rule of Japanese comedy. Rule number two, discrimination, prejudice. These should not be the themes of Japanese comedy. Well, I know. In Japan, there are discriminations against ethnic Koreans, ethnic Chinese, all these people who are, really audacious enough to live in Japan, but who are often discriminated against because of some stupid people who do not understand the history of these wonderful nations and who have their own prejudices. And in English comedy world, of course, these would be the staple food for comedians to make laughter out of. In the US, for example, racial discrimination is a really important aspect of comedy. I know that. In the UK, discrimination or prejudice is in the workplace and in schools is a really important issue for comedians to make laughter of. Not so in Japanese comedy. You should be ignorant of these social problems. You should never mention ethnic Koreans in your comedy, especially when you are on TV. Because Japanese TV is based on the premise that the viewers and the comedians are at the age of 5-year-old, as I said. Even the NHK, especially the NHK, which is something equivalent to the BBC in the UK, they never, ever broadcast comedy on social discrimination prejudices. I know. How can comedy be made in that really restricted space? Well, you can put the comedians in a really hot bath, and the comedians kind of enjoy that hot bath and, oh, it's hot. That is Japanese comedy. Or you can, kind of bully somebody, some young comedian, bully him or her, and when he shrieks and, oh no, that is comedy. That is Japanese comedy. Of course, I'm kind of exaggerating. There are some really wonderful comedy tradition in Japan, like Rakugo. Rakugo is a really wonderful Japanese tradition in laughter. There are many classic works which depicts a human condition as we experience it in its joys and sorrows, sadness and surprises and encounters and farewells and so on. So Rakugo is a wonderful art form of laughter. And also manzai is, two persons exchanging funny remarks and, generating mirth and laughter out of miscommunication, misjudgment, and, small talks and anecdotes and so on. That is a really wonderful tradition of Japanese laughter. All these things do exist, but Japanese comedy, unfortunately, in general, do not address the pressing themes of today. For example, Mr. Mori, the chairperson, the chief of the Tokyo Olympics organizing committee, he made some really stupid remark, as you may be aware, about women talking too much in conferences, so that we should have less of them. That is, that was what Mr. Yoshiro Mori said, a former prime minister. Can you believe that? And he goes without being uh, punished for that. I mean, that's Japan. So there's a ripe ground for comedy, you would think. Not so on Japanese TV. Japanese comedians never ever mention Mr. Mori in their comedy making. Strange, huh? That's Japanese comedy for you. So, you never venture into controversial minefields if you are a Japanese comedian and if you like to appear on Japanese TV. Because, Japanese TV is, based on the premise of not seeing, not hearing, not speaking. Yeah, it's really funny because, Japan do not, Japanese media, they don't have a censorship like in China. In China, if you criticize CCP, well, what would happen. But in Japan, there is not such a thing, and it's about self-restraint. The Japanese people are, worldwide known for their self-restraint, right? They would restrain themselves, probably including myself, although I'm not such a person who would restrain myself so easy. That is why I landed on my, many, public disasters in the past. Because I, for example, criticized Mr. Hiroshi Matsumoto, who is a really well-known Japanese comedian and who is treated like God by his, younger generation comedians, and who is never criticized. And I did criticize him, so I, and my, well, and do uh, backlash on social media. But I did that. But Japanese comedians in general never ever criticize each other, and so there's this whole atmosphere of lukewarm back scratching among the makers of comedy, and they never criticize politicians. For that, they were awarded really lucrative jobs from the government. The Yoshimoto company is known to receive a lot of commissions from the government, which is an open fact. I mean, it's not a secret. It's not something that it's done in the backstage. I mean, it's something out there and for everybody to see. And that's one of the reasons why probably the comedians in the Yoshimoto company cannot criticize politicians, and which of course makes Japanese comedy really narrow in its aspect. But for so far the Japanese audience do not notice it because they don't get to see The Office, Veep, uh, you know, um, Borat films. They don't get to see it. I mean, of course, some people do get to see it, like myself, and I'm always making noise about the really poor state of Japanese comedy. But it doesn't take hold on the general public because Japanese people are meek. The political style and social criticism, it's not their staple food because they are not educated that way. In Japanese schools, you are taught to obey the teachers, but never to question their authority. So it's a systemic failure in Japanese society to have a metacognition, if you like, of the social problems, and make a comedy engine to bring about social changes by recognizing what the real problems are. And that is a shame, I think. I really think that is a shame. I love this country and I love Japanese culture, but I really, really, detest the lukewarm atmosphere in which Japanese comedians make a really, you know, half-heated laughter on Japanese terrestrial TV, which, by the way, are increasingly boycotted by the younger generation because they prefer YouTube and other media outlets. And but unfortunately, because of this social atmosphere, this shift from terrestrial TV to YouTube and other social medias have not resulted in a shift in the way laughter is made in Japanese society, which I think is a really missed opportunity because I'm quite sure if the satire format is imported from the US or the UK or other nations into Japan, I think the Japanese would be able to perfect it and if, to an even higher standard because that's what happened to automobiles and many other Western civilization items, right? So it's a huge missed opportunity. Wait until Japan makes its own version of The Office or Beep or the Borat film. I think if the Japanese creative talents are tapped into, I'm sure Japan will be able to produce something that would be both amusing and also revealing for the general public in the world. So for that reason, if you read Japanese um language, I have been tweeting recently about this lack of political satire, social criticism, metacognition about prejudices and misconceptions and all these things in Japanese comedy, and I have making noise. Of course, there are backlashes, but I don't care because as somebody who studies the brain and who is interested in consciousness, comedy is very important because it's something that helps us with metacognition, and with that metacognition, you cannot make really good theory. And it is Friedrich Nietzsche who's predicted that the era of tragedy is coming to an end, and an era of comedy is starting. That's what he predicted in his book Gay Science. And I really admire Nietzsche's vision of that. So that's why I'm so seriously interested in comedy as it is applied in this country. And I hope Japanese people would be able to do better in the coming years. And they can do better. That's what I believe. So that's why I'm making these noises. And if you are watching this from outside Japan, and if you are a comic, please come to Japan and make your splash. I mean, help us comedians in the world. You are my only hope, to quote or misquote this wonderful passage from the Star Wars film. Anyway, nice talking to you, and let's see what happens in the Japanese comedy world in the next few years.